Hello, I'm Art Motozenik, and I'm with the American Association of Pharmaceutical Scientists. It's my pleasure to host a series of interviews with distinguished pharmaceutical scientists who have contributed to the discipline of pharmaceutics, pharmaceutical chemistry, pharmacokinetics, drug metabolism, and the various disciplines that find themselves in the family of the AAPS. It's a pleasure to institute and continue this program through the distance learning program of the AAPS. It's my pleasure today to welcome as our interviewee Dr. George Zografi. Professor Zografi is at the University of Wisconsin School of Pharmacy. George, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this series.
Pleasure to be here, Mark.
And it's happy to be here back in Madison, since this is also I'm an alumnus of this school, so I'm very proud and pleased to always come and see distinguished faculty such as yourself being honored by this series. One of the things I'd like to begin with is to ask a little bit about your background in training, where you were born and where you were raised, and then what motivated you, maybe initially, to look upon pharmacy as a choice of academic pursuits for your undergraduate degree.
Yeah, I grew up in New York City, in Manhattan, and my father was a pharmacist. He was a community pharmacist in Manhattan, and but he died when I was 11 years old. So the direct connection to him was not there at the time of graduating from high school. But at the time I graduated from high school, I was rather young and I had a widowed mother. So I pragmatically chose to go into a profession that would provide employment at the end of the baccalaureate level degree. And actually I had a very strong interest at the time in other subjects such as history, and probably in retrospect would have gone that pathway, but we chose the pragmatic way, and I entered Columbia University College of Pharmacy, which was the school that my father graduated in many, many years before.
Well, it's always interesting to look at a discipline like history. There are so many distinguished scientists who have historical interest because they're interested in precedent and accuracy and reliability. So, you know, it's I'm sure that your maybe lifelong interest in history may have been pursued through your professional interest in science. Is that true?
Yes, I've always had an interest in the history of science, and particularly after I came here to Madison, where we have an active history of science and history of pharmacy program. That was an avocation all during the period that I was working here at the faculty.
Well, later you chose to pursue primarily an academic career, but before we get to that, I'd like to pursue your interest in undergraduate pharmacy at Columbia. Were there any instructors or teachers who mentored you and motivated you to maybe move outside community practice, which you just described as a family, financial stability goal, and move toward a more science-based career as pursuing a PhD would indicate?
Yes. In my sophomore year, two young professors came to work at Columbia University. Dr. Roy Kuramoto, who was a graduate of this school, the University of Wisconsin, and was one of the first graduate students of Takuro Higuchi, who really initiated the whole program of pharmaceutics and physical pharmacy. He arrived in 1954 when I was in my sophomore year, and Dr. Louis Malspice came from the University of California, a young pharmaceutical chemist at the time. And both of them set our entire group in our class in really thinking about the more scientific aspects of pharmacy. And this led to undergraduate research with Dr. Malspice and Dr. Kuramoto, and then a lot of encouragement to continue our education. In fact, there were large numbers of that class. Out of 83 students, I think at least 20 of us went on for some type of graduate study. So that was a complete shift in my interest from becoming a professional pharmacist to one that would get involved in the science.
Now, the Columbia School of Pharmacy doesn't exist anymore, but at that time, did it have a master's program in pharmaceutical technology, or how was it directed?
Yes, they only had a master's program at that time, and I was tempted to stay there for the master's program, but frankly, Dr. Kuramoto and Dr. Malspice encouraged me to go straight for the PhD, to a PhD program elsewhere, and I ended up at the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy.
And what attracted you to Michigan?
Well, there were a number of, I think the best schools that were offering PhD programs in pharmaceutics or pharmacy or physical pharmacy as we call it then, were in the Midwest, frankly. And there were schools like Purdue, Michigan, Wisconsin, of course, was really the mecca at that time. And I applied to all of those schools. And the Michigan program seemed to be very attractive, and that's where I went.
And you certainly did very, very well, I might say, at the University of Michigan, not only in the pursuit of your graduate program there, but you were one of its most distinguished graduates and alumni, and took a position there at the university.
That's right.
How did that come about?
Well, when I completed my PhD requirements, I was very anxious to get back to the East Coast to be near my mother. I was married at the time, but we felt that we'd like to be near our family. And Columbia University College of Pharmacy asked me if I would come back to the school as an assistant professor. So that's what I did. I went back there and was there for about 4.5 years. And that was a wonderful experience because I was able to develop my research interests as well as my teaching interests very well. A lot of encouragement for both research and teaching. About 4.5 years into Columbia, I was approached by the University of Michigan to come back, actually to replace Jerry Goyen, who was a professor there, who later on became the dean at University of California and FDA commissioner. That was quite a person to replace. Mm-hmm. At that time, William Higuchi, the brother of Takaru Higuchi, had joined the Michigan faculty, and my major professor actually had left to go into industry.
We should mention his name.
Yeah, Albert Maddox.
Yes,
very important influence on me. Mm-hmm. So I returned to Michigan after 4.5, 5 years at Columbia.
So we have these research interests being developed at Columbia. Was that inspired by your sense of purpose or observation, or did you have any unique scientific inquiry experiences that taught you to go in that area? And what were some of those disciplines?
Well, my PhD thesis work was basically in the surface chemistry of solids, adsorption of materials on solid surfaces. And this was developed with Dr. Maddox's encouragement, but he left me pretty much out there by myself for quite a while, learning these new concepts. So when I came to Columbia, I was asked to teach a course in surface chemistry, which was kind of scary at the time. I learned right away that there was a scientist on the campus in the Department of Engineering who was a world-famous surface chemist. His name was Jack Shulman. So I went to him mainly to see what he did in the way of teaching surface chemistry in the engineering school and what I might do to complement that. And he gathered me into his laboratory, showed me all of the things that were going on, and it was a totally new world of surface chemistry that I was used to. Mm-hmm. He asked me if I'd like to come to the lab and I could stay and learn all of the equipment. So with the permission of my dean, Dean Llewellyn, I was allowed to spend about 1.5 years on my own time in the sense of evenings and weekends working as a postdoctoral fellow while I was also teaching a full teaching load and starting my research program. It was Dr. Shulman that really set me forth in the area of surface chemistry, primarily the surface chemistry of surfactants and lipids at liquid interfaces. That was the area that I worked in all the time that I was at Columbia.
Well, Shulman is certainly well recognized, as I appreciate, and you and I have discussed his many, many contributions. So it's an encouragement to see that you reach outside of pharmacy to draw in some of those disciplines. Okay, so then when you went to Michigan to replace Jerry Goyen, did you develop any specific research interests, and how much was teaching a part of your passion at that time?
Well, in those days, we were expected to teach quite a bit. Typically, we were teaching every semester full courses by ourselves with labs. So teaching was considered to be a very important component, and research was also considered important. So we were under a lot of pressure to keep ourselves busy. At Columbia, because of Dr. Shulman's interests, I did develop a strong interest, as I said, in the surface chemistry of materials and liquid interfaces. And therefore, when I went to Michigan, I continued that work. I was able to get some NIH support for work on the phenothiazine drugs, which happen to be very surface active and very membrane active. And this continued for quite a while until about 1966, when I went to the Upjohn Company for a summer fellowship, and that was another pivotal point in my research interest. But until then, I was strictly a surface chemist working at liquid interfaces with micelles and microemulsions and surfactants and things of that sort. Classical surface chemistry and colloids applied to pharmaceutical systems.
Well, still looking at those emerging years before we go back to the Michigan and the Upjohn experiences, you spoke a little bit about family, and then you were married, and how much of your support system in terms of your inner circle was important to you as you emerged and dedicated yourself to teaching and science?
Well, it was very important. As soon as we arrived in New York, we did have our first child, and then we had another child 2 years later. So during our short period in New York, I had a family with 2 children, and a wife who stopped, the traditional 1950s wife, stopped working as an educator and stayed home to take care of the children. A tremendous support, as you can imagine. I was putting in enormous hours of teaching preparation, research, evenings, weekends, the typical academic lifestyle, particularly at the beginning of one's career. And without the love and support of my wife, Dorothy, and the rest of our family, who were all in New York at that time, it would have been very difficult to maintain that pace and still have a family to enjoy. Mm-hmm.
Well, I do remember, because I shared that Upjohn summer with you. I was an employee at Upjohn in research at that time. What a pleasant experience it was to have you there, and we saw you as an emerging thought leader, not just from the University of Michigan, but for the science of colloid and surface chemistry that you were certainly supportive for. And there were colleagues at Upjohn that you developed a relationship with that you probably had a collaboration with for the rest of your life. Who were some of those people?
Well, one of them was you.
Well, I wasn't fishing for that.
I know. We met in 1966, and that was a very enjoyable experience, and that remained throughout our careers. I guess the most influential person at Upjohn was Dr. Everett Heaston.
Right.
And he actually came to Michigan in 1965, soon after I arrived, and we got into a lot of discussions about surface chemistry and colloid chemistry, which was his background. As you may recall, he was just embarking on a long-term interest in the physics and chemistry of tableting, how we take these powders and punch them together into little tablets that people take orally. And he was, until then, it had been a very sort of empirical science, and he was trying to bring some really fundamental science to it. So basically, he invited me to come to work in this summer professor program to look more closely at some of the issues related to how tablets are made and what are the forces and physical factors that promote the bonding of solids to form tablets. Using my expertise, so-called expertise at that time, in surface chemistry, because the idea was that it was a surface that was very important. Well, indeed, it turned out that we had a wonderful summer together, and not only did this set some seeds for my own future work. Everett went off to do wonderful things in the mechanical properties of solids. I became more intrigued with the surfaces of solids, and so this was certainly the beginning of something very important for me in my own research, a switch into, not a switch because I continued my work with liquid interfaces, but a change in emphasis to the solid state. And Everett and I maintained this relationship until now. We still keep in touch periodically. He's retired well in his 80s.
Well, as much as you might acknowledge that Everett had an influence in supporting your interests and mentored you a bit in those areas, I can assure you that your summer there also was as a giver and not just as a taker, because I can remember based on the interest you generated, the program that we had in other areas amongst the younger scientists there followed your interest in interfacial chemistry to, for example, the work in coating of tablets and microencapsulation immediately built on your disciplines that you were teaching us that summer in wedding, spreading, and cohesion. And so I can assure you that was a full circle. We kind of had an interesting network there. It was a wonderful program. The Upjohn Company no longer exists, but that summer professor program was one of the best kind of collaboratives between academics and industry people, and the distinction was very blurred.
Yeah, well, it certainly had a great impact on my career.
And I certainly feel that programs like that are now followed by other companies and other universities, but that was a pioneer program in that era in the 60s and 70s. Well, you had a very distinguished career at Michigan. Why don't we talk about that a bit? You rose through the ranks, developed a very active academic program. You attracted some very powerful and keen minds to your own research programs. And I remember that Michigan program was one in which there was a family of faculty there that was very dynamic. You mentioned Bill Iguchi, but there were others. And I'd like you to talk about your Michigan years.
Yes, it was a wonderful period, again, in my career. The timing was just right. Bill Higuchi had come to Michigan from Wisconsin as a young, I think he came as a full professor, actually, and was trying to develop a group that would be taking new directions, different than perhaps the work that his brother had been doing. He had developed a very strong interest in mass transport and diffusion and its role in bioavailability and stability. And I felt very fortunate to be part of that small group consisting of Bill Higuchi, Tony Simonelli, and Norman Ho came to join us after he got his PhD with Bill. And then later on, John Wagner joined our faculty. So during that period of about 8 years that I was at Michigan, I was working with some great people with a variety of innovative ideas. So it certainly stimulated me to develop my interests at the highest level possible.
I remember during that period of time, you began to draw a lot of international acclaim. People were cognizant of the Zografi school of thinking on interfacial chemistry, surface chemistry. You were emerging as one of the very strong singular voices in the pharmaceutics area for surface chemistry applications, uniquely many times as a problem-resolving area where other people had strictly looked at a molecular chemistry approach. What about your international outreach at that time?
I went to the Netherlands for a sabbatical during that period of time, and that really opened up my interest in what was going on internationally. I attracted a number of postdoctoral folks from the Netherlands and from Germany. So I started attending FIP meetings, the International Congress of Pharmaceutical Sciences, meeting people from other countries. So, and I also, through my interest in surface chemistry, basic surface chemistry, I attended a number of Gordon conferences dealing with surface chemistry where I met international scientists from all over the world. Particularly the English at that time were very strong in surface chemistry. And so I made many, many good friends and colleagues who, again, stimulated me in moving ahead in surface chemistry. Yeah, we didn't invent the topic of surface chemistry, obviously. This is an old field, a strong field. But I think that if we made one contribution, it was that we brought that kind of thinking into the pharmaceutical field. I'd like to think we contributed to bringing fundamental aspects of surface and colloid chemistry into the workings of both academic and industrial pharmacy. And that was lots of fun. Did a lot of short course teaching during that time to pharmaceutical industrial folks on some of these topics.
We talked a bit about your the people that mentored you and the people that inspired you. I want to make sure that we didn't miss anybody. Was there anybody at Michigan who gave you a particular boost or gave you an assist in your career besides the ones you've already mentioned, perhaps at the administrative end of the university, or maybe even from industry or people who might have supported your work?
Throughout my career, both at Columbia, Michigan, and also at Wisconsin, the administration of the school were very supportive of both my interest in teaching and research. In fact, I liked the balance of teaching and research, and it was very hard to do. And you weren't always recognized for your teaching at the university, where there was a lot of research-intensive activity. But all of my deans assured me that they wanted me to be active in both areas, and gave me a little more time to develop my research, as opposed to a situation where I might put my entire energy into research. Tom Rowe, the dean at Michigan, was like a father to me, and likewise Dean Llewellyn, Elliot Llewellyn, Emerson Llewellyn at Columbia University, both were outstanding mentors in terms of encouraging me to pursue a full academic life. Those were really the two folks that made a difference.
So seemingly you were a Michigander and a U of M kind of alumnus, a distinguished son, prominent faculty member, and then you moved to Wisconsin.
Yeah.
What about that transition? That caught a lot of people off guard, and it was
caught me off guard.
It was a big win-win for you and for the University of Wisconsin. But I saw the University of Michigan program as somewhat a surprise at first. And of course, they have done very well since at that time. But talk about those years.
Well, it's an interesting story because Wisconsin was really Mecca, and we at Michigan were sort of trying to compete or trying to bring ourselves up to that level. I think Bill Iguchi particularly had that feeling. And we were very proud of the fact that our program was growing and doing very well. One day, the new dean of the School of Pharmacy at Wisconsin came to visit Ann Arbor and was sent to see me because I was chairman of the curriculum committee. It had nothing to do with science.
And this dean was Perlman?
And his name, David Perlman.
Right.
And David Perlman came to my office, and we chatted, and we just hit it off immediately. Mm-hmm. I liked him very much, and apparently he enjoyed talking with me. And when he went back, it wasn't a few weeks that I received a letter asking me if I want to come out and consider positions. They were undergoing changes here in faculty, as you know. Takaguchi had left. There were lots of vacancies. And so I actually turned him down the first time. But he said, why don't you just come out, give a seminar, and see what it's all about. That's how it started.
Okay. And your family move at that time was a dislocation, or was it part of a new chapter in their lives as well?
Well, we at that period of time, the children range in age from 10 to 2, and so it wasn't terribly disruptive for them.
Yes.
And obviously, we were very happy in Ann Arbor, and couldn't imagine living anywhere else. But when my wife and I arrived in Madison for that first visit together, I had come earlier, we both fell in love with the city and with the university.
Now, you joined the University of Wisconsin faculty and certainly brought the enthusiasm for continuing your surface chemistry approach and your fine teaching record. But you weren't here a very short time when one of the 2 or 3 chapters in your life, which I'll get to again in a few other examples, you were ushered into a switch in career to become the dean in what I would call a calming move. George, respectfully, you have the kind of temperament that is good for bringing different points of view together. And I saw that in your services when you were president of the APS, and also clearly when you resolved a lot of major issues amongst some discontinuities in the Wisconsin situation. Talk about that as well as you can, because that was I think respectfully, a lot of people appreciate very much your service. Was it 5 years as dean?
Yes.
Yes, in your 5 years as dean.
Yeah, I didn't come here to be dean. Some people, since it was so soon after I arrived, many people thought I actually came here to be dean. But a few years after I arrived, David Perlman decided to go back to being a professor. And actually, he was my role model while I was dean, because he maintained his research program all the time he was a dean. That allowed him to go back. The School of Pharmacy had gone through a lot of changes in the late 60s with Takaru Higuchi leaving, and there frankly were a lot of conflicts going on about who would be the new dean, and so there was a lot of splitting among the faculty and a lot of disunity. during the early part of the late 60s, just after David Perlman. In fact, quite frankly, I came in and interviewed in 1969 and found this discontent so strong that I actually decided not to come. And it was not until 1972 that I was again invited to come back that I accepted the invitation to come here. I became dean for one particular reason, and that was that our school was a little behind others in developing their clinical program. And where clinical programs had been developed in schools of pharmacy, they had been rather disruptive in terms of the conflict between pharmaceutical sciences and clinical sciences. It's a long story that many people know about. It was important to the University of Wisconsin that we develop a clinical program, but at the same time that we not in any way damage the outstanding research and scientific program that had grown here over the decades. So really my major goal and charge from the president of the university, the chancellor of the university, was to develop this clinical program and at the same time maintain the excellence of the remaining part of the program. And I was given the charge to deal with that specific issue as well as to help create an environment that was more unified. For instance, the pharmacy alumni had been rather discomforted by some of the changes that had taken place in the late 60s. And one of my roles for 5 years was to visit pharmacy alumni and ensure them that the School of Pharmacy was interested in progressing in both the professional and the scientific aspects of pharmacy.
Well, you certainly served that 5-year period and then stepped away from the deanship to completely confirm the fact that you didn't want to be the dean. However, I might observe that the 5-year period there, really, you are acknowledged as laying a foundation as a change agent. Certainly that model of Wisconsin transitioning has become a paradigm shift that other universities go through periodically as their faculty matures and ages and retires and new people come in. So I think that experience at Wisconsin has been envisioned and experienced at many other universities since then. So I applaud the 5 years you spent as dean. So you reached out of the deanship. You said you maintained an active research program while you were dean. How many students did you maintain while you were a dean?
While I was dean, I think I had 3 PhD students and a postdoc.
Well, that's a fairly active program.
Yes,
Almost,
yes.
Some people would think that's a full program. And then, I might say, when you set the deanship aside and entered into your full professorship and your full research career, you really hit full gear in your career. Would that be correct? That was pretty much high stride for you?
Yeah, everything came together. The seeds had been sown towards the end of my stay at Michigan in terms of particularly of the solid state. And I started, even before I became dean, doing some work in the solid state on wettability, particularly contact angles and the behavior of liquids and solids. And that really got me going into the solid field. But it's when I came back from the deanship and really started attracting graduate students to my laboratory that some of the new efforts that I wanted to pursue in research took shape. And I was very fortunate to get some very outstanding graduate students the very first year that I came back to full-time teaching.
And your outreach in that program, was it primarily toward students who came from pharmaceutical disciplines, or did you attract students from chemistry and biology and other disciplines as well?
It's a pretty good mix. One of the group of people that I was very happy to attract were folks who had worked in the pharmaceutical industry at the baccalaureate or master's level and who had been encouraged by folks like you at the PhD level, their supervisors, to go back and get more education. Mm-hmm. And I can say clearly that a group of those folks made a big difference in how well my group developed in general. Also was able to attract a few foreign students, but primarily the group that I had working with me at that time were either from the pharmaceutical industry or directly from schools of pharmacy, or a few came from chemistry departments, yes.
I remember a contribution that you made, which we were all appreciative of, when you and Everett Heastand served as co-managers of an exploration of the criteria for selection of fellows. And I appointed you to that position. You helped clarify the role of how one should recognize excellence in pharmaceutical science, and that guideline that you and Everett set is still followed to this day. In other words, how to recognize an industrial scientist, how to recognize someone who has a career in regulatory and compliance issues at FDA, as well as the traditional criteria for academic achievement in a university. That was a tough nut to crack.
It was a very tough nut to crack, and there were very strong feelings that Academy Fellows should only be those with vast publication records and scientific achievement. And yet it was clear that a large proportion of our membership were folks who were doing very innovative work in pharmaceutical technology within their companies, not often able to publish their work, but reflected in patents as well as invitations to speak at symposia. And so we felt that it was important to expand the criteria, always remembering that we wanted excellence, but expanding it to include these other contributions that industrial pharmacists were making. And I think that you're right. I think that since then we've seen this as less of an issue, clearly.
Mm-hmm. It was a very important piece of work because it helped set the bar at a fair level, and it permitted the recognition of a lot of worthy people who had previously had difficulty demonstrating recognition of their credentials. In 1989, you were elected to the Institute of Medicine. It made us all feel very proud that you had achieved that recognition. How important was that recognition, not just to you and your students, but to the program? I feel we're very fortunate to have that kind of singular recognition of our pharmaceutical disciplines at a broad science level nationally like that.
Yes, it was very exciting, of course, personally, to be honored in that way. I was quite surprised, quite frankly. I had been dean of the School of Pharmacy earlier, and had made these other contributions, but really never thought of myself in that way. But what was important about it was that the Institute of Medicine, which obviously is dominated by the medical profession and to some extent the nursing profession, had very few pharmacists in it. And it was really important to have a critical mass of pharmacists who could bring the knowledge they had concerning drug therapy, the industrial aspects of pharmacy. So I was very pleased to be part of that, and actually served on one major committee that dealt with the standardization, not of drugs, believe it or not, but of food. But with my experience working with the United States Pharmacopoeia on standardization of excipients, I was asked by the Institute to serve on this commission for a couple of years. So it was an interesting experience for me. It has been as well as reward.
Well, you certainly have spent a fruitful and productive career at Wisconsin. I wondered if you might acknowledge in your own thinking, in your research programs, some of the areas in which you reached out for a lead from another discipline outside of our pharmaceutical disciplines. Maybe even, if you could, recognize a scientist that you never met, but whose work you admired and perhaps drew into your program. Like the mention of Schulman was someone who actually you wound up visiting his laboratory and you establish a personal relationship. But how far did you reach out and maybe in your distinguished career build on some of the leads that came from other disciplines?
When I worked with Everett Heastand, part of the summer of 1966 was dedicated to working in the library, reading work from other fields. Everett was wanted us to use as much as we could from outside our own field. And I came across many, many studies that were dealing with topics related to solids, surfaces, and water. Water started to become a very important aspect of our discussions because water was a very good probe for looking at solid surfaces. The way solids took up water reflected the properties of the solid. And therefore, I came into the literature particularly influenced by Felix Franks. I would say he was a very influential person. He had written or edited a 15-volume treatise on water. So that became one of the very important elements of what later developed into our research, bringing together solids, surfaces, and water, really. So he is certainly an important person. I had the pleasure of meeting him at an Arden conference where we both taught in a conference on water and solids. Mm-hmm. And he was invited and came, and there we had a wonderful opportunity to talk, for me to ask lots of questions, and he opened up my vision even more so, and led me to a number of people in the food science field who were very active in the effects of water on the stability of solid materials used in foods, and particularly Louise Slade and Harry Levine, who were very well known for their innovative ideas in the field. And I later met both those folks, and they provided me with lots of information and literature references. And so those were very important influences from the outside in developing my new interests in solids, surfaces, and water.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we could transition some of these seminal leads, for example, as you developed your early interest in lipid research and interfacial phenomena, monolayers and adsorption phenomena, and then went to water on solid as an interface, and the importance not just pharmaceutically but also perhaps in biological systems. Where do you see some of the applications, maybe not just through your work, but maybe your students' work, some of the student investigators who are now teaching other students? Where do you see them taking some of the areas of research in terms of a continuing of this progression?
Yeah. Well, the fundamental thought that we had about this issue of water, solids, and surfaces, we initially thought that water could be a probe, as I said, for looking at the energetics of molecules at solid surfaces. The water would seek out those molecules that were very polar as opposed to nonpolar, and could be used as a characteristic of the solid surface. But what we soon discovered through the work of Lynn Van Kampen and Mark Contney in my lab here at Wisconsin very early was that the water was not stopping at the surface. In many situations, it was going into the solid, particularly when the solid was non-crystalline. And first, we thought this was an artifact of our measurements because we were getting more water uptake than we would have predicted. And then we soon discovered that we were really seeing the absorption of water into amorphous regions. Then, of course, you go to the literature, and you see the large variety of studies that have been carried out over the years about the role of water as a plasticizer in being taken up by amorphous solids. And that was coupled with experiences that I had as a consultant, where I was asked to look at solid state stability issues, chemical stability issues, and why such little water has such a big effect on solid state stability. And sure enough, we were able to show that during the processing of solids, and this is really something that Everett Heastand knew about, thought about, the processing of solids created disorder in the crystalline surface. Water was taken up. It was a plasticizer, which meant that it loosened up the molecules so that they could move around more in the solid state. And this is what gave rise to instability. And from there, I think the field has developed, and many of my former students and many colleagues now are actively working on the role of disorder in chemical and physical instability.
Well, and I was leading to the application of your work in biological systems, because in the kinds of adaptation phenomena that come with aging in biological systems, not only in the animal kingdom but in the plant kingdom, some of the lack of understanding what's happening at the interface is strictly associated with these hydration effects that you're talking about, the water absorption phenomena. So do you see, for example, in biology, further continuity in the future, perhaps, of applications of the work that you've kind of defined in the physical and the chemical world?
Particularly the application of this concept that water is a plasticizer plays out in efforts to preserve biological materials by lyophilization, by freeze drying, creating solid material which can then later be reconstituted. The stability of proteins and other biological materials, lipids that are used in liposomal preparations, all rest very heavily on the state of hydration of these molecules. And even recently, we've been able to publish some work that I think has some impact on that, and I've noticed it's now being taken up by a number of people in the field.
And you have had a significant role as a teacher and as a dean in the academic area. You've also contributed significantly as a teacher in conferences, and as you spoke about, you mentioned the Arden Conference, but you're quite a prolific contributor to industrial seminars. Even at this time, you're probably as active as you've ever been, I noticed. How do you feel that outreach has been? Has that been somewhat not just a contributing opportunity, but also an opportunity to increase your networking and assessment of where current issues are?
I can say unequivocally that my interactions with industry started about 1975 when I first became dean. I started going to Merck 4 times a year. Because of my surface chemical interests, they invited me to consult with them on a variety of problems. I learned more about industrial pharmacy, the development of dosage forms, stability issues, manufacturing issues, in those 5 years, or there were actually 6 years that I was a consultant with Merck. And this, of course, led to consultanships with other companies, where I would go in, not on specific projects, but would go in to review projects and assist young scientists in their work. And it was a two-way street. I don't know what I contribute, but I can tell you that the wonderful work going on in many of these companies provided me with the basis for more understanding of what I could teach to my students.
And you've been not just a teacher, but a teacher of teachers, if I might say. Your mention earlier of your activities in the AACP are prominent. You received the Wohlheiler Award and various other recognitions from that organization. How would you see, George, as some of the evolution of curriculum from the 20 years ago and earlier when you were a student even, to the era today, and where is it going? Because I'd be remiss in the area, for example, of pharmaceutics that's being taught at schools of pharmacy today. How do you see that transition, and where are we headed, and what are the new opportunities that we have in programming today?
Yeah. Well, in the 1950s, thanks to Takara Higuchi and the Wisconsin School of Pharmacy and those that followed him, the influx of science into the teaching of pharmacists really accelerated. And the concept of physical pharmacy coming into the curriculum was developed. And I feel very fortunate to have been developing my career and my interest in teaching at that time. This physical science has slowly evolved into more and more aspects of pharmaceutical sciences that are important to both pharmacists and industrial scientists. For instance, the research that we started doing was pretty much straight physical chemistry, and I would say that has been pretty much my interest, applying physical chemical principles to systems before they go into the body. But we know that this whole concept of physical pharmacy is responsible for the evolution of pharmacokinetics, bioavailability, and other aspects of that work. Well, it's obvious that as we got more and more interested in the administration of drugs to patients, what happens to them after they're taken, their rates of dissolution, their rates of absorption, their rates of metabolism, etc. It's natural that people would want to get more involved with aspects of targeted drug delivery, more specific ways to promote the efficacy of drugs, controlled release. And this is where the field is going now. The concept of drug delivery is well in place. People looking for exotic ways to control drug delivery, even after administration, intracellular trafficking. This is where the field is going. What I hope, however, is that in the training of our PhDs, that we don't lose sight of the fundamental importance of the physical sciences. So I hope that that will continue to be a viable option for graduate students, particularly going into the pharmaceutical industry. We still need people interested in stability, solubility, crystal forms, water absorption, things of this sort. But clearly the field is evolving toward a more biological direction in terms of more impact of drug delivery on drug therapy.
And would you say that this focus and discipline is brought on more at the graduate level rather than the undergraduate level, let's say in schools of pharmacy or chemistry?
No, well, certainly in undergraduate schools, the pharmacy programs, the PharmD programs, are much more clinically oriented, and we in our teaching of the physical sciences constantly have to motivate our students through the use of obvious and potential pharmaceutical applications in the biological arena. I think that it's clear that's where the interest is. As far as other, we see this also in chemistry departments. For instance, biological applications of chemistry are a major part of teaching even freshman chemistry now.
You've had some interesting ideas that you've generated into the academic and research programs here at Wisconsin. One of the more recent contributions with the new School of Pharmacy that's been constructed in the last decade and just has emerged in the last few years is the Lear Experimental Station, which you had a lot of organizational contribution to. You want to speak to how that came about and who were the motivators and what the program genesis was?
The Pharmaceutical Experiment Station is one of my late year, my old age passions, yes. About 12 years ago, we were approached by a number of investigators on campus asking us if we could help them to take what were discoveries of molecules as potential drugs and help them to improve the characterization of those molecules so that they might then be more useful in the long run. And this was encouraged by the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, WARF, which patents these various molecules for our faculty. In turn, the proceeds of that money, the proceeds from those patents, comes back to the university in the way of research. So it seemed a wonderful opportunity for the School of Pharmacy to contribute to this whole process. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get our act together for about 10 years until the Rennebaum Foundation approached Mel Weinswig, our dean at that time, with a gift of $1,500,000 to help establish the Pharmaceutical Experiment Station, which had been on the drawing boards, but we haven't been able to get it going. That happened to coincide with my official retirement as professor emeritus. I was rehired for half-time, and one of my responsibilities was to see if we could get the Pharmaceutical Station moving. So we spent a year planning a business plan, really, with the help of the campus Office of Corporate Affairs. And we were fortunate enough to attract a mutual friend of ours, Lynn Van Kampen, one of my early solid-state graduate students, to attract her from Nectar Pharmaceutical Company and become our director. And the rest is history now. I'm still working very actively. And starting Monday, we will have our new associate director, so I can retire.
Okay. You mentioned earlier, that's a wonderful contribution. We all look to see how that program will emerge because the university has a wonderful facility, so it'll be a unique opportunity to have the experimental station grow within the growth of the college. You mentioned earlier some of your interactions with USP. Let's talk about your interactions with government, with FDA, USP, maybe the Environmental Protection Agency, other agencies, and also not just at the federal level but state. How in your distinguished career have you had opportunities maybe to collaborate or to participate in survey work or to serve as an advisor or consultant with these agencies?
My major work along those lines really has been restricted to the USP, the United States Pharmacopoeia, and briefly through the Institute of Medicine with the Food and Chemicals Codex, which is a similar compendia but for foods, chemicals rather than drugs. I spent 10 years working with the USP, particularly with the subcommittee on excipients, at a time when we were just starting to think about harmonization of standards, and lots of controversy about how you standardize excipients. And we introduced issues related to water, standards on water. That was a very nice experience for me, and I enjoyed those 10 years, actually, of working with that group. I have had very little interaction with the Food and Drug Administration, and it was only 2 months ago that I finally was invited, not finally, but I was invited to participate in a short course for reviewers where I could present my ideas on water, solids, plasticization. So there I've not had much experience.
Well, you've also been a major contributor to some of the really long-running, successful conferences and programs. I know that you're shepherding the Land O'Lakes program, the Ozark program, the Arden Conference that you spoke of, and others. How do you feel about the importance of those industrial conferences, so to speak, or Gordon Research-like conferences, but for the pharmaceutical arena?
Absolutely essential. All three of those conferences at the time, they've since changed somewhat, at the time used the Gordon Conference-like model to allow industrial scientists to mix with academic scientists and be brought up to date on fundamentals and new directions in their particular fields. I consider that a very important element in bringing this kind of education to industrial scientists and bringing them together with academics. And the Land O'Lakes Conference has been a passion of mine. I think I've served on the planning committee ever since I arrived here in 1972. And it continues to meet the objectives of being a good teaching conference as well as bringing people together. And I think that the Ozark Conference that Takaguchi developed had the same purpose, as well as Arden House. I think they're very important. The AAPS national meeting is an important meeting, but it's a large meeting, and oftentimes you can't get that intimate teaching that is so badly needed. So I think we need a mixture of large meetings and small meetings, and these small meetings really do meet a purpose.
Can you recall in your career, when you were a younger scientist, attending any of these conferences or meetings, any kind of significant encounters or experiences where you were particularly moved, maybe not by a speaker, but by the generation of a provocative idea, seed of an idea, that you said, that's worth taking back, and you built on that?
Yeah. 2 conferences. One was at here in Madison in 1961 when I was on the faculty at Columbia. And it was a teaching conference, but as part of that teaching conference, we were given reviews of current knowledge in different fields like solubility, diffusion. And a speaker from Abbott Laboratories came to speak about surface chemistry and the use of monomolecular films to study the action of drugs on membranes. And I was blown away. Mm-hmm. And I went up to him afterwards and asked him where I could learn more about this. And it was he who told me about Dr. Jack Shulman. And that's when I also went to see Dr. Shulman. That was a really...
Who was the Abbott scientist, do you recall?
No, I don't remember his name.
Was he in product development or pharmaceutical research?
He was in something called pharmaceutical research at the time, and it was sort of an interface between drug discovery and product development. Amazing that he was way ahead of his time in that area. And that's really motivated the research that I've carried on to this day in surface chemistry. The other moment was the 1967 Land O'Lakes Conference. And you may have been there. Mm-hmm. Dr. Everett Heastan invited me to present the results of our survey together in 1966. So I was able to, for the first time, to put my ideas, our ideas, into the milieu of the topic was solid state behavior of pharmaceuticals in general. And I was able to meet all of the top people in the field and people who were contributing in different areas. That was another a momentous occasion for me.
I perhaps was there. Was that the meeting where Carl Meisel's and Stu Erickson and a few other people had some major provocative discussions about water? Yeah. And that was a period of time when those meetings were a prize to be able to be there. And if you were not able to attend, you feasted on the discussion that attendees had when they returned to your area. Absolutely. So that was the way science was communicated in those days. It was contagious. A lot of really raw energy was driven about curiosity.
So many new ideas going around, yes.
Well, this has been a pleasure speaking with you, George, and appreciate your contribution to the pharmaceutical arena. It's a pleasure on the part of the AAPS Distance Learning Committee to have had this opportunity and to welcome you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
And I really appreciate your acknowledging of the many people who have contributed to your career and to your professional advancement. But we were gifted tremendously in having the contribution repaid by the career that you continue to play and the important contributions you make today. Thank you, George.
Thanks, Art.
So this has been another contribution in the series on distinguished pharmaceutical sciences. It's been our pleasure to have this chat with Dr. George Zografi of the University of Wisconsin. Thank you.